The sun was rising in Chicago as Ryan Matthews adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. At 42, he was the CFO of a major construction company, respected in the community, and an active member of Hope Community Church. His reflection showed a man of impeccable appearance, graying hair at the temples and brown eyes that hid a deep dissatisfaction. He didn't even recognize himself. "Ryan, breakfast is on the table." Emily's voice, his wife, echoed down the hallway. They had been married for 15 years, but it had been a long time since they truly looked at each other. In the kitchen, their children, Megan, 14, and Ethan, 10, were hunched over their phones. Ryan sat down, opened the newspaper, and created another barrier between himself and his family. "Dad, today is my ballet recital," Megan commented, looking hopeful. That's nice," he replied without taking his eyes off the newspaper. "I have an important meeting today. I might not be able to make it." The girl's face fell, but Ryan didn't see. It was always like this: work commitments, church meetings, anything that kept him too busy to be present. "Shall we pray?" Ryan said, automatically extending his hands. The family formed a circle, and he recited the same words as always. "Lord, thank you for this family and for this food. Bless our day. Amen." A 30-second prayer. Empty words that echoed in the spiritual void that his faith had become. In the building's elevator, he met Mrs. Johnson, an elderly lady who lived alone on the 3rd floor. "Good morning, Mr. Matthews," she said with a fragile smile. "Could you help me carry these groceries later? My legs aren't what they used to be." It's complicated today, Mrs. Johnson," he replied quickly. "I have commitments all day. Maybe the doorman can help." On the way to work, his cell phone rang. It was his younger brother, Mike. "Ryan, I need to talk. I'm going through a difficult time with Sarah. I think our marriage is ending." His choked voice betrayed his contained tears. "Mike, I'm going into a meeting now," he lied, looking at his watch. "Can we talk about this on Sunday at church? You should pray more, brother." He hung up without waiting for a response. On the radio, the pastor was talking about compassion and love for others. Ryan turned up the volume, feeling virtuous for listening to religious messages. At the construction company, he walked right past Lisa, the janitor who was cleaning the lobby. She greeted him, but he pretended not to hear. In the elevator, he ignored the young intern trying to start a conversation. In his office, he dismissed the secretary who was trying to alert him about problems with subordinate employees. During the board meeting, he approved a cut in benefits for the construction workers without questioning the consequences for their families. "It's necessary for the company's profit," he justified, feeling pragmatic. At lunch, he met Pastor Samuel at the executive restaurant. "Ryan, good to see you. How's your walk with the Lord?" "Excellent, Pastor. I've never been so close to God," he replied with a rehearsed smile. "We're organizing that food drive campaign as you asked." "You're an example to the congregation, Ryan," the pastor affirmed. Those words fed his spiritual vanity. He was respected. He was a man of God, at least in appearance. He didn't realize that his faith had become just a social facade, a badge of respectability. In the afternoon, as he left work, he passed a man asking for help on the sidewalk. He averted his gaze, quickened his pace, and locked himself in the comfort of his imported car. These bums should work instead of begging, he thought, completely forgetting the teachings about mercy he had heard at Sunday's service. Traffic was heavy that afternoon in Chicago. Ryan drummed impatiently on the steering wheel, irritated by the lost time. He took an alternative route, accelerating to make up for being late to his next meeting. The traffic light ahead turned yellow. Instead of slowing down, he floored the accelerator. The world seemed to slow down when the huge truck appeared from the right, ignoring the red light. Ryan only had time to widen his eyes before the devastating impact. The sound of twisted metal, shattered glass and tires screeching on the asphalt was the last thing his ears registered. Then silence. Ryan blinked, confused. He was standing in the middle of the street, observing a surreal scene. He saw his own car destroyed, people running, sirens in the distance. He saw paramedics arriving in a hurry, opening the crumpled door of his vehicle. "Hey, I'm here!" Ryan shouted, but no one looked. He approached a police officer and tried to touch him, but his hand passed through the man as if it were made of mist. A chill ran down his spine when he saw the paramedics removing a body from the car, his body. He watched, incredulous, as the professionals tried to revive him, the chest compressions, the defibrillator. He heard technical words, saw discouraged looks. "I'm not ready," he whispered to himself. "I can't go now." As if in response to his desperate thought, the scene around him began to dissolve. The asphalt, the cars, the people, everything gradually disappeared like paint dripping from a canvas. Ryan found himself floating in a dark and infinite void without references of space or time. "Where am I?" His voice produced no sound, but echoed in his mind. Suddenly words appeared in the void, as if projected onto huge invisible screens. They were his own words. "I'm a good person. God knows my heart. I do enough. I owe nothing to anyone." Each phrase hovered around him, illuminated by a cold light that came from nowhere. And then, as if in a movie projected on the walls of that abyss, Ryan began to see scenes from his own life. He saw himself ignoring Emily's muffled crying at night, pretending to sleep to avoid confronting the problems in their marriage. He saw the times he promised Megan and Ethan he would be present for important moments, only to cancel at the last minute. He saw the hurt look on his brother Mike's face after numerous attempts at a sincere conversation, always rejected with excuses of lack of time. The images continued, relentless. Employees unfairly fired with his approval. Donations to the church made more for status than charity. Mechanical prayers without involvement of the heart. Harsh judgments about others while justifying his own failures. "Stop!" Ryan tried to shout, but the images continued, faster and faster, more and more painful to watch. A feeling of shame invaded him, so intense it felt physical. For the first time in his life, Ryan clearly saw who he really was. Not the virtuous man he imagined, but someone who had lived decades in superficiality, in comfort, in indifference, disguised as righteousness. A presence approached. It had no defined form, just a kind of shadow denser than the darkness around it. Ryan felt fear, a primitive and overwhelming fear he had never experienced before. The presence didn't speak, but a question arose in his mind, clear as crystal. "Did you think I didn't see?" That simple question crumbled all his certainties. Every justification he tried to formulate seemed childish and empty in the face of that presence that seemed to know every corner of his soul. I didn't realize," he tried to answer, but the words seemed inadequate. How not to notice a lifetime of omissions? How not to notice the emptiness of his faith? When despair threatened to consume him, a light appeared in the distance. Soft. At first, it intensified until it became almost blinding. The shadowy presence retreated. In the light, a figure took shape. Ryan recognized it immediately, not the Jesus of church paintings or biblical illustrations, but a real, intense presence, impossible to ignore or reduce to simple religious concepts. "You called me, but never knew me." The voice was gentle, but each word penetrated deep into Ryan's soul like an inescapable truth. Before that presence, every empty prayer he had made, every act of superficial piety, every selfish choice he had made in the name of practicality, everything became undeniably clear. To his horror, the light began to move away. The darkness began to thicken around him again. An abyss seemed to open beneath his feet. "No!" He shouted with all the strength of his being. "Please, Jesus, forgive me!" It was a cry not only from his mouth, but from his newly awakened soul, a cry born not of fear, but of genuine repentance upon seeing who he really was and who he could have been. The light stopped its movement of retreat. The constant beep of medical devices was the first sound Ryan registered. His eyelids felt as heavy as lead, but he managed to open them slowly. Fluorescent light, white ceiling, smell of antiseptic. Hospital. "Doctor, he's waking up." Emily's voice sounded close, trembling with emotion. A middle-aged doctor approached, followed by a nurse. His look was a mixture of surprise and professional relief. "Mr. Matthews, can you hear me?" Squeeze my hand if you understand what I'm saying." Ryan felt the doctor's fingers between his and squeezed lightly. He wanted to speak, but a tube in his throat prevented him. His eyes desperately searched for Emily. She was there, eyes red, from crying so much, holding his free hand as if she feared he might disappear at any moment. Behind her, their children, Megan hugging her younger brother, both with expressions of fear and hope mixed. "It's a miracle," said the nurse, checking. "The monitors." He was without vital signs for almost 4 minutes. The words echoed in Ryan's mind, 4 minutes. To the world it was only 4 minutes. For him it seemed he had lived an eternity in that void, in that confrontation with his own existence. It hadn't been a dream. The shadowy presence, the light, Jesus, everything was real, more real than anything he had ever experienced. In the days that followed, Ryan recovered with a speed that surprised the medical team. The tube was removed, he regained his speech and gradually regained control of his body. Physically, the doctors predicted an almost complete recovery, something they called exceptional, considering the severity of the accident. But Ryan knew that the true transformation wasn't physical. One quiet afternoon, when he finally was alone in the hospital room, Ryan closed his eyes and tried to pray. Not the automatic prayers of before, but something new, something that came from the core of his being. "Thank you," he whispered, tears flowing freely. "Thank you for the second chance." When Emily returned to the room, she found him still crying. "What's wrong, my love? Are you in pain?" she asked, alarmed. "No, Em," he said, using the affectionate nickname that hadn't left his lips in years. "I'm feeling everything." He held her hand urgently. "We need to talk. Really. For the first time in a long time." In the hours that followed, Ryan opened his heart to his wife like never before. He talked about the emptiness he had felt for years, about how he had transformed his faith into mere appearance, about how he had neglected what really mattered. "I saw things when my heart stopped," he finally said. "Things I can't fully explain, but that changed everything." Emily listened to everything with a mixture of confusion and hope. Part of her wanted to believe it was just the effect of medications or trauma, but another part, perhaps the deepest, recognized an authenticity in him that she hadn't seen in a long time. "People will think I've gone crazy," Ryan said, holding his wife's hands. "Maybe I have, but I can't go back to being who I was before, Em. I just can't." Maybe you shouldn't," she replied softly. The following week, when the doctors finally authorized visits beyond the immediate family, Mike was the first to appear. He entered the room hesitantly, carrying a flower arrangement. "My God, bro," he said, visibly emotional. "I thought we had lost you." To his surprise, Ryan extended his arms, asking for a hug. Mike, disconcerted by that unusual display of affection, approached. The brothers hugged for a long time. "Forgive me," Ryan murmured, "for all the times you needed me and I wasn't there." Mike pulled away, looking at him strangely. "Who are you? And what have you done with my brother?" he joked, trying to disguise the emotion. "I'm trying to figure that out," Ryan replied sincerely. When Pastor Samuel came to visit him, he brought a Bible as a gift and offered words of spiritual consolation. Ryan listened respectfully, but something had changed. The canned phrases which he himself used to repeat now seemed empty compared to the direct experience he had had. "Pastor," he gently interrupted, "how do I know if I really know God or if I just know things about him?" The question caught the religious man by surprise. "Well, through the study of the Word, prayer, fellowship." "Yes, but—" Ryan hesitated, searching for the right words. "What if we do all that and still don't know him truly? What if it's all just an empty ritual?" Pastor Samuel adjusted uncomfortably in his chair. "These are deep questions, Ryan. Perhaps we should discuss them when you're more recovered." But Ryan knew there was no going back. The seed of transformation was already planted, and nothing could prevent it from growing. At night, as he watched the city lights from the hospital window, Ryan tried to organize his thoughts. The world seemed the same out there, but his eyes now saw it completely differently. The people passing on the street below, each carrying their own stories, their own emptiness, their own searches for meaning. I need to tell them, he thought. I need to warn everyone that one day they will be where I was. After 3 weeks in the hospital, Ryan was finally discharged. The return home was filled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, the joy of surviving, of having another chance. On the other, the anxiety of facing the world with his new eyes, with his new understanding. The apartment seemed different now, not because of the things themselves, but because of the way Ryan perceived them. Each object, each room carried memories of a life he no longer recognized as his own. We prepared a surprise, announced Emily, guiding him to the dining room where an improvised banner said, "Welcome back, Dad." The table was carefully set, with dishes that Ryan recognized as his favorite foods. Megan and Ethan hugged him with an intensity that surprised him. It was as if, for the first time, they felt they had permission to show affection without reservations. "I missed you so much, Dad," said Megan with teary eyes. "I thought you weren't coming back," confessed Ethan, his small voice evidencing the fear he had felt. The children's words hit Ryan like a punch in the stomach. How many times had he been physically present but emotionally absent? How many times had his children wished for a hug, a word of affirmation, any sign that they were important? "I missed you too," he replied, his voice choked. "More than you can imagine." During dinner, Ryan was surprised to find himself genuinely listening for the first time in years. He heard about Ethan's school routine, about Megan's ballet classes, about Emily's challenges in keeping everything running while he was in the hospital. He discovered details of his own family's life that he was completely unaware of. After dinner, while Emily washed the dishes, Ryan passed by Megan's half-open door. The teenager was sitting on the bed, drawing in her notebook. "Can I come in?" She nodded, surprised at the unusual request. Ryan sat on the edge of the bed, uncomfortable, realizing how rarely he had been there in recent years. "What are you drawing?" "Just doodles," she replied, quickly closing the notebook. "Megan," Ryan took a deep breath, "I missed your ballet recital, didn't I?" The girl looked away. "It's okay, Dad. You had an accident, it wasn't your fault." "But I missed all the previous ones too, and I had no excuse," he admitted. "And how many other important things did I miss? How many times did I say I was too busy when, in fact, I just wasn't prioritizing what really matters?" Megan looked at her father, confused by that sudden display of vulnerability. "The accident changed you," she commented, trying to understand. "Not the accident itself, but what happened while I was—" He hesitated, unsure how to explain. "Let's say I saw things as they really are, for the first time." The next morning, Ryan woke up early. The sun hadn't even risen completely, but he felt an unusual energy. He went out to the apartment's balcony and watched the city slowly awakening. "What do I do now?" he whispered to the brightening sky. "How do I start over?" The phone rang inside the apartment. Emily answered and soon came to call him. "It's from the construction company," she said. "Mr. Sullivan wants to know when you're coming back." The construction company, his job. Suddenly the idea of returning to that corporate life, to those decisions based solely on profits, seemed unthinkable. "Tell him I'll call him later," he replied. After breakfast, while Emily was taking the kids to school, Ryan stayed alone, in the apartment. He walked to the office, a room that was once his refuge, where he spent hours working on weekends, ignoring his family. Now it seemed like a monument to his former misguided life. On the shelf, he found his dusty Bible. He opened it and realized he barely knew the book he had so often quoted to justify his positions. He began to read as if it were the first time. The intercom rang. It was Mrs. Johnson, the elderly neighbor he had so often ignored. "Mr. Coleman, forgive me for bothering you, but I heard you were back from the hospital. I just wanted to welcome you back." Instead of thanking her briefly and dismissing her as he would have done before, Ryan invited her up. He prepared coffee, and for the first time really listened to the widow's stories. About her late husband, her distant children, her loneliness disguised as independence. "Would you like me to help you with your weekly shopping?" he offered. At the end of the visit, Mrs. Johnson's look of surprise and gratitude was the first of many rewards Ryan would experience in his new life. When Emily returned, she found him making a list. "What's that?" she asked, curious. "People I need to reach out to. People I need to ask forgiveness from. People I ignored. People I hurt." The list already occupied almost the entire page. "I'm thinking of starting a kind of personal mission." Emily sat down next to him, a mixture of concern and curiosity on her face. "What kind of mission?" Ryan held her hands, his eyes reflecting a conviction she had never seen before. "I need to do whatever it takes to not waste this second chance, Em. I need to live differently, completely differently." That night, Ryan dreamed. He was again in that dark void, but this time there was no fear. The light approached, warm and comforting. "You have much to do," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere specific. Ryan woke up with those words still echoing in his mind. He looked at Emily sleeping beside him and made a silent promise. "I won't waste this opportunity. I won't go back to being that man." "It's absolutely out of the question, Ryan." Mr. Oliveira's voice, the construction company's president, echoed through the meeting room. "You've been our CFO for 8 years. You can't simply decide to work part-time overnight." Ryan remained calm, facing the surprised and disapproving faces around the table. It was his first week back at work, and he was already causing a small revolution. "I understand your position, Mr. Oliveira, but my decision is made. Either I work part-time or I'll have to submit my resignation." A tense silence took over the room. The other directors exchanged worried glances. Finally, the president spoke again, this time in a more controlled tone. "Ryan, I understand that. The accident was traumatic. Maybe you need more time to recover completely. Why don't you take a few more weeks of leave?" "This isn't about trauma or physical recovery," Ryan responded firmly. "It's about choices and priorities. I've dedicated too many years to this company, neglecting what really matters. That ends today." The meeting ended in a stalemate, with Mr. Oliveira asking for time to consider the situation. As he returned to his office, Ryan was intercepted by Helen, the marketing director and his colleague for years. "What's gotten into you?" she asked, closing the office door behind her. "You're throwing away years of career. Has this near-death experience affected your judgment?" Ryan smiled, a serene smile that disconcerted Helen. "On the contrary, for the first time in a long time, I'm thinking clearly." "Clearly?" Helen let out a nervous laugh. "You just threatened to resign from a position many would kill to have." Ryan looked at her with compassion. "Helen, how long has it been since you've seen your children awake during the week? How many of their birthdays have you missed because of business trips? How much longer will you spend chasing promotions and bonuses, believing that will fill the void you feel?" Helen's face hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm perfectly satisfied with my choices." "I thought I was too," Ryan responded softly. That afternoon, Ryan did something he had never done before. He went down to the cafeteria of the construction workers. He sat among men in dusty overalls and calloused hands who looked at him with evident distrust. He was the director who had cut their benefits the previous year. "May I join you?" he asked a group. The men exchanged surprised looks but nodded in silence. As they ate, Ryan heard stories about families supported on insufficient salaries, about postponed dreams, about the daily effort to survive with dignity. Before returning to the office, he said, "I'll do my best to reverse the benefit cuts, you have my word." One of the older workers, Anthony, who had been with the company for over 20 years, laughed bitterly. "With all due respect, sir, we've heard promises before. Words are easy." "You're right, Anthony," Ryan nodded. "That's why I'm not asking. To you to believe me now, just watch what I'll do from here on out." At home, Ryan announced that he had managed to reduce his work schedule to part-time, despite the resistance from the board. "But why?" Emily asked, genuinely confused. "We'll have a significant reduction in our income." "Because I need time," he explained. "Time to be really present in your lives. Time to help people who need it. Time to understand what really matters." Emily looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Ryan, I support you, you know that. But these sudden changes, I don't know if they're sustainable." I have no choice, Em. I can't go back to being who I was. On the weekend, Ryan called an unprecedented family meeting. Sitting in the living room, he, Emily, and the children openly discussed the changes that would come. "We need to reduce some expenses," Ryan explained. "Maybe sell the imported car and buy a simpler one. Postpone the international trip we were planning." To his surprise, there were no major protests. Megan even suggested that they could reduce her expenses with private lessons, and Lucas offered his allowance to help. "You guys are amazing," said Ryan, moved, "and I wasted so much time not really knowing you." On Sunday, Ryan went to church, as usual, but everything seemed different now. The pastor's words, which before passed through him without real impact, now reverberated deeply. Not because they had changed, but because he had changed. After the service, while other members chatted in small groups, Ryan approached a man he always saw at the back of the church, a shabby old man whom some avoided because of his smell of alcohol. "Good morning. My name is Ryan," he introduced himself, extending his hand. The man looked at him suspiciously but shook the offered hand. "Sebastian. Would you like to have a coffee with me, Sebastian? There's a good place nearby." At the coffee shop, Ryan listened to the man's story. A former teacher who had lost everything after problems with drinking and depression. He offered no judgments or easy solutions, just listened with genuine interest. "Why are you doing this?" Sebastian finally asked. "Religious people usually just want to convert me and then disappear." "I'm not trying to convert you," Ryan replied. "I'm trying to convert myself into someone better." On Monday, Ryan arrived at work determined. He went straight to the president's office with a detailed proposal to reverse the benefit cuts for the workers, showing how it could be funded by reducing unnecessary expenses in other areas. Mr. Oliveira listened thoughtfully and then asked, "This is very important to you, isn't it?" "It's a matter of justice," Ryan replied, "something I've recently learned to value." The days turned into weeks, and the changes in Ryan's life began to create waves that reached more and more people around him. Some reacted with admiration, others with suspicion, but no one remained indifferent. At the construction company, Ryan's proposal to restore employee benefits was approved after much insistence, but it created a rift in the relationship with the other directors. In the hallways, they whispered that he had lost focus, that he was emotionally unstable after the accident. "You're creating powerful enemies," warned Paul, one of the few colleagues who still maintained an open dialogue with him. "Mr. Oliveira only gave in because you threatened to take the case to the press if it was refused." "I don't care about enemies," Ryan replied. "I care about doing what's right." During a particularly tense meeting, Helen, the marketing director, exploded. "This is ridiculous. First, you abandon half of your work hours, then you start questioning strategic decisions you always supported, and now you're suggesting we abandon the Palm Gardens project because you discovered some irregularities. This is the company's biggest venture in the last 5 years." Ryan remained calm as slides detailed the luxurious condominium that would be built in an environmental preservation area after dubious legal maneuvers. "I'm not suggesting we abandon it. I'm stating that I won't participate in something that clearly violates ethical and legal principles." "Principles?" Helen laughed bitterly. "You signed dozens of similar projects over the years. What's changed now?" "I've changed," he replied simply. When he arrived home that night, Ryan found Emily waiting for him in the living room, visibly worried. "I received a call from Helen today," she said. "She's worried about you. She said you're sabotaging your own career, that you're different, obsessive." Ryan sighed, sitting down next to his wife. "She's right in part. I am different, and maybe I am sabotaging that specific career, but I can no longer separate my values from my work, Em." "I'm not questioning your motivations," Emily replied, holding his hands. "I'm worried about the consequences. The kids mentioned that some of their school friends said you went crazy after the accident. It's spreading, Ryan." Something tightened in Ryan's chest. He hadn't thought about the impact his changes would have on the children. "I also received an email from Pastor Samuel," Emily continued. "He's uneasy about the questions you've been asking in church, about how you've been challenging some traditional teachings. He said several members are uncomfortable." Ryan laughed humorlessly. Jesus made the religious people of his time uncomfortable. Maybe it's a good sign. Ryan, I'm trying to understand, believe me, but sometimes I feel like I lost my husband in that accident and gained another man in his place. The words hit Ryan deeply. He stood up and walked to the window, observing the illuminated city outside. Maybe you're right, he said finally. Maybe the man I was did leave that day. But don't think it was a choice, Em. After what I saw, what I experienced, I can't simply ignore it and go back to living as before. The next day, the tension at the construction company reached its peak when Ryan presented his resignation letter to Mr. Oliveira. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," said the president, refusing to accept the document. "Think about your family, your future." "I am thinking about them," Ryan replied, "and also about all the families that will be impacted by the Palm Gardens project, the communities that will be displaced, the environmental area that will be destroyed. There have always been consequences, Ryan. Progress has a price." "Yes, but who pays that price? It's never us, is it?" As he left the construction company building for the last time, Ryan felt a mixture of liberation and fear. For almost a decade, that job had defined who he was. Now, he was alone with his new consciousness and without a concrete plan. He decided to walk through the city center before going home. As he walked, he observed the hurried faces around him, executives rushing to meetings, street vendors struggling for daily survival, homeless people invisible to most people's eyes. He sat on a park bench and closed his eyes, letting the sounds of the city envelop him. When he opened them again, he noticed a man watching him intently from a nearby bench. Something about him seemed strangely familiar. The man, realizing he had been noticed, stood up and approached. "Ryan Coleman?" he asked. "Yes, do we know each other?" The man smiled, an enigmatic smile that caused an inexplicable shiver in Ryan. "Not officially yet. My name is Gabriel. I've been following your journey." "What do you mean?" Ryan frowned, suspicious. "Let's say we have common interests," Gabriel replied, sitting down next to him. "You experienced something rare, Ryan. Something few have the privilege of experiencing, and even rarer, returning to tell about." An alarm sounded in Ryan's mind. How could this stranger know about his experience? "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, standing up to leave. "I know you saw beyond the veil," Gabriel said calmly. "I know you encountered the light, and that now you're trying to live according to what you learned. But I also know you're encountering resistance." "A lot of resistance." Ryan stopped, turning slowly to the man. "Who are you?" Gabriel smiled again. "Someone who can help you fulfill your purpose. Because you have a purpose, Ryan. Your experience wasn't accidental. You were chosen." "Chosen? For what?" "To help others see what you saw before it's too late for them." Ryan felt his heart race. Those words echoed his own thoughts since he had returned from the hospital. "How do you know all this?" "Because you're not the only one," Gabriel replied, handing him a simple card with just an address and a time. "Come tomorrow if you want to meet others who share your experience, people who can help you understand your greater purpose." Banti. He watched Gabriel walk away among the crowd. Ryan felt torn between distrust and an inexplicable feeling that this encounter was not a coincidence. He looked at the card in his hand, thoughtful. "Who are you really, Gabriel?" he muttered to himself. The address on the card led Ryan to an old two-story house in a quiet residential neighborhood away from the center of Philadelphia. He hesitated before ringing the doorbell, still uncertain if he should trust the mysterious, "Gabriel, you came." Gabriel smiled as he opened the door. "I knew you would." The interior of the house was simple but welcoming, well-preserved wooden furniture, walls in light tones, some strategically placed plants, nothing to suggest a strange cult or suspicious organization. "The others are already in the living room," Gabriel indicated the way. Ryan found a small group of about 8 people, men and women of different ages, sitting in a circle of chairs. They all observed him with expressions that combined curiosity and recognition. "Everyone, this is Ryan Coleman," Gabriel introduced. "Ryan, welcome to our group." A woman of about 50, with gray hair and a gentle expression, stood up to greet him. "I'm Eliza. It's good to have you with us, Ryan. One by one, the others introduced themselves. Michael, a retired police officer, Sophia, a young medical student, Anthony, a university professor, Teresa, a housewife, Claude, a taxi driver, Rachel, a nurse, and Joseph, a frail-looking elderly man with an intense gaze. What exactly is this group? Ryan asked while accepting a cup of tea offered by Gabriel. We are people who share a common experience, Eliza replied. All of us here have been to the other side and come back. Ryan felt his heart race. You all died? Clinically, yes, said Anthony, the professor. Some for minutes, others for longer. But we all experience something beyond the physical. Experience. And we all experience the judgment, Michael completed with a grave voice. We saw our lives being revealed, our choices exposed. Ryan nodded slowly, the cup trembling slightly in his hands. Did you also see him? A reverent silence took over the room. Not everyone had exactly the same experience, Gabriel explained. Some saw the light, others heard the voice, some encountered loved ones who had already passed. But we all experienced a fundamental truth. There is more beyond this life, and our choices here have eternal consequences. Sophia, the medical student, leaned forward. When I came back, no one believed me. My professors at college said it was just a hallucination caused by lack of oxygen in the brain. My own family suggested therapy. I know how it is, Ryan commented. People think you've gone crazy. Or that you're traumatized, Claude, the taxi driver, added. Or having a midlife crisis. Any explanation will do as long as they don't have to. Confront the possibility that maybe we're telling the truth. Over the next few hours, each one shared their story. Eliza had survived drowning, Michael a gunshot during a police operation, Sophia a severe allergic reaction, and so on. Different circumstances, different lives, but a central experience that united them. What exactly do you do, Ryan finally asked, besides sharing your experiences? We try to live according to what we've learned, Joseph, the elderly man, replied, speaking for the first time. His voice was surprisingly strong for someone of such fragile appearance. And we try to help others awaken before it's too late. Watiorn. Do you mean awaken? Gabriel exchanged glances with the others before answering. Ryan, have you noticed how most people live asleep? Pursuing things of no real value, ignoring what really matters, building lives based on illusions? Exactly how I used to live, Ryan admitted. It took a drastic experience to wake you up, Gabriel continued. But what about others? Do they all need to go through what we went through to understand the truth? We believe not, Eliza intervened. We believe we can help people see beyond the illusions of this world without having to come so close to the end. How? Ryan asked, genuinely intrigued. In different ways, Anthony explained. I use my university classes to provoke deeper reflections in my students. Sophie organizes support groups at the hospital. Claude transformed his taxi into a space for meaningful conversations. Small actions that can make big differences, Teresa added. It's not about converting people to a specific religion, but awakening them to a deeper reality. And we have bigger projects too, Gabriel added with a gleam in his eyes. Projects that can reach many more people. Something in Gabriel's expression made Ryan feel slightly uncomfortable, but the feeling was quickly overshadowed by the excitement of finally finding people who understood him, who had gone through the same thing he had. I'd like to help, Ryan said, holding his wife's hands. Since I came back, I feel like I need to do something meaningful, something that can really impact lives. And you will, Gabriel assured, placing a hand on his shoulder. That's why you're here, that's why you were chosen. At the end of the meeting, as he said goodbye to each one, Ryan felt simultaneously relieved and uneasy. Relieved for not being alone in his experience, for finding others who validated what he had lived through, but also uneasy, unable to define exactly why. Will you come back next week? Eliza asked as she accompanied him to the door. Yes, definitely, Ryan replied. It's good not to feel like a crazy person for once. Never doubt what you experienced, Ryan, she said with an intense look. Even when others doubt, even when you yourself start to question, hold on to the truth that was revealed to you. On the way home, Ryan reflected on everything he had heard. Those people seemed sincere. Their stories resonated with his own. And yet there was something he couldn't identify, a small dissonant note that disturbed the harmony of the whole. When he arrived home, he found Emily waiting for him in the living room with a worried expression. "Where were you?" she asked. "I tried calling several times." "I'm sorry, my phone was on silent," he explained, showing the missed calls. "I met a group, people who went through experiences similar to mine." Emily observed him carefully, as if trying to decipher something in his expression. "What kind of group?" "It's not a religious cult, if that's what you're thinking," Ryan tried to joke, but realized from her expression that the humor wasn't well received. "They're just people who had near-death experiences and who, like me, came back different." "And what exactly do you do in this group?" "We talk, share our stories, discuss how we can use what we've learned to help others." Emily nodded slowly, but her gaze revealed a persistent concern. "And who leads this group?" Ryan hesitated for a moment. "A man named Gabriel. He found me yesterday, somehow knew about my experience. Doesn't that seem much strange to you? A complete stranger knowing intimate details of your life?" For the first time in weeks, I've found people who understand me, who don't look at me like I've gone crazy. Please try to understand how important this is to me." Emily sighed, temporarily surrendering. "Just promise you'll be careful, okay? You're vulnerable now." "I promise," Ryan replied, hugging her. Later, lying in bed while Emily slept, Ryan couldn't stop thinking about the group, about Gabriel, about the stories he had heard. Had he found a purpose there? Or just people as desperate as he was to make sense of inexplicable experiences? And why, despite the relief he had felt, did, a small voice in his mind, continue to question Gabriel's intentions? In the weeks that followed, Ryan immersed himself deeply in the group's activities. He participated in weekly meetings, helped with social projects organized by its members, and spent hours talking with Gabriel about more ambitious plans. "We're preparing something big, Ryan," Gabriel confided during one of their private meetings. "Something that could touch thousands, maybe millions of people." "What exactly?" Ryan asked, intrigued. "An event. An opportunity to collectively share our experiences, to show the world what we've seen and learned. A chance to wake people up to the truth before it's too late." There was something almost feverish in Gabriel's enthusiasm, something that simultaneously captivated and unsettled Ryan. "When will this happen?" "Soon. We're finalizing the details. I'll need you to be one of the main spokespersons, Ryan. Your story, your previous position as a respected executive, will give credibility to our message." Meanwhile, at home, the distance between Ryan and his family grew subtly. Emily silently observed with concern how her husband spent more and more time with those people, as she referred to the group. The children felt the tension, even without fully understanding it. "Dad, are you going to take me to the movies on Saturday like you promised?" Lucas asked during dinner. "Saturday?" Ryan frowned. "Oh, Lucas, I completely forgot. I arranged with Gabriel to help organize materials for the event." The boy's face visibly wilted, but Ryan didn't see. It was always like this: work commitments, church meetings, anything that kept him too busy to be present. "You always have commitments with this Gabriel now," Mia muttered, rolling her eyes, with typical teenage indignation. "It's important, honey. We're doing something that can help many people." "And us?" Emily intervened calmly. "Aren't we important too?" The question hit Ryan like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly what he used to say before, that he was busy with important things when he neglected his family? "You are the most important thing to me," he replied, feeling the weight of the contradiction in his own words. "It doesn't seem like it," Emily replied, getting up to clear the plates. "You've traded one obsession for another, Ryan." That night, lying next to Emily, who pretended to sleep, Ryan reflected on her words. Was he just replacing his old superficial life with another type of escape? The question deeply bothered him. The next morning, an unexpected phone call pulled him from these thoughts. "Mr. Thompson, this is Lucy from Mr. Oliver's office." Ryan was surprised. He hadn't had contact with anyone from the construction company, since his turbulent departure. Mr. Oliver would like to meet with you today, if possible. He says it's urgent. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Ryan agreed. A few hours later, he was sitting in the elegant meeting room where he had so often participated in corporate decisions. Ryan, Mr. Oliver entered with his usual confident air, although something in his eyes seemed different. "Thank you for coming. I confess I'm intrigued by the invitation," Ryan replied. The construction company president sat down, looking at him intently. "You were right about the Palm Gardens project," he finally said. "The irregularities were more serious than we thought. There was an investigation and we're about to face a scandal." Ryan remained silent, surprised by the admission. "But that's not why I called you. It's about this." Mr. Oliver picked up a flyer and slid it across the table. "Group you've joined." Ryan looked at the paper. It was an invitation to the event Gabriel was planning. The Truth Beyond Life. Experiences that transform. How did you get this? Helen attended one of their meetings last week. She became worried and came to me. Helen? Ryan couldn't hide his surprise. What would she be doing there? Apparently, worried about you, and with reason. Mr. Oliver opened a folder and took out several documents. Gabriel Mendoza. He founded this group about 5 years ago, after allegedly having a near-death experience during surgery. Since then, he's gathered people with similar experiences. I know all this. What are you trying to say? Did you know he's been investigated for extortion? That several people who went through the group donated significant amounts, often all their savings. Ryan felt his stomach sink. This can't be right. And this event they're planning? It's an elaborate scam, Ryan. Expensive tickets, promises of extraordinary revelations, commercialization of deeply personal experiences. No, Gabriel never mentioned charging for tickets. It's an event to share our message, to wake people up. Wake people up or exploit their vulnerabilities, Mr. Oliver pushed more documents towards him. Helen did thorough research. See for yourself. With trembling hands, Ryan examined the documents. Rental contracts for a large convention center, promotional material mentioning ticket prices, elaborate marketing strategies to attract people in moments of emotional fragility. There must be some mistake, he muttered, but doubt had already set in. Ryan, I know we had our differences, especially after your transformation, but I've always respected your integrity. That's why I couldn't let you be manipulated like this. As he left the construction company office, Ryan felt dazed. The information he had received contradicted everything he believed about Gabriel and the group. He needed to get to the bottom of this. Instead of going home, he drove directly to the residence where the meetings took place. It was an unusual time, and he didn't expect to find anyone, but he needed time to think, maybe look for some evidence that contradicted Mr. Oliver's accusations. To his surprise, there was movement in the house. He parked at a safe distance and approached on foot. The door was ajar, and voices came from inside. He immediately recognized Gabriel's. And Ryan will be perfect as the main spokesperson. His story is exactly the kind of exciting narrative that attracts an audience. But he really believes in all this, replied a female voice that Ryan identified as Renata, the nurse. I don't feel good deceiving him like this. We're not deceiving anyone, Gabriel retorted impatiently. Everyone here had their experiences. They're true stories. We're just monetizing them efficiently. And what about the ticket prices? Asked another voice. $500 is a lot of money for many people. It's the price of revelation, Gabriel replied with a light laugh. The more expensive, the more people value the experience. Basic psychology. Ryan felt sick. Every word confirmed the suspicions raised by Mr. Oliver. He was about to move away when he heard his name again. Ryan is totally committed, Gabriel was saying. He left a lucrative job. He's distancing himself from his family. It's the kind of dedication we need. His emotional vulnerability makes him perfect for our purposes. Unable to hear more, Ryan moved away silently. The betrayal he felt was overwhelming. Not only had Gabriel lied about the group's objectives, but he was consciously manipulating people in moments of fragility. People like him. He drove aimlessly for hours, trying to process everything he had discovered. Night had already fallen. When he finally returned home, finding Emily in the living room, visibly worried. "Where have you been? I called several times." "You were right about Gabriel," Ryan said, collapsing onto the sofa. "About everything." As he recounted the day's events, he saw Emily's look transform from concern to understanding, and finally to compassion. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she said, sitting beside him. "I know how much that group meant to you. How could I have been so naive, so easily manipulated, because you were looking for answers, looking for meaning in something deeply personal." Ryan covered his face with his hands. "And now? Everything I believed in the last few weeks was a lie." Emily held his hands, gently pulling them away from his face, forcing him to look her in the eyes. "The experience you had, what you saw, when your heart stopped, that wasn't a lie, was it?" "No," Ryan replied softly. "That was real, more real than anything I've ever experienced." "Then you haven't lost your true north, you just took a temporary detour." That night, for the first time in months, Ryan slept deeply, without dreams or restlessness. The following morning brought the clarity of a new beginning, free from Gabriel's manipulations, but still transformed by the original experience that had changed his life. The sunrise found Ryan sitting on the apartment balcony, watching the city wake up. He had made a decision. He wouldn't allow the disappointment with Gabriel and the group to erase the essential truth of his experience. He needed to honor that second chance in his own way, authentic and without manipulations. "Can I join you?" Emily appeared at the balcony door, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. "Always," he replied, accepting the coffee with a grateful smile. They sat side by side in silence for a few moments, just contemplating the horizon that was gaining colors. "What are you going to do now?" she finally asked. "First, I need to make a visit," Ryan replied. "There are people in that group who are sincere, who were also deceived. I can't just disappear without explaining what I discovered." Emily nodded, understanding. "And then?" "Then, I'm going to build a life that honors what I learned, without extremism or obsessions. A balanced life, but authentic." A few hours later, Ryan met with Eliza in a coffee shop. He chose her among all in the group because he felt her sincerity was genuine. "Gabriel is using all of us, Eliza," he explained after reporting his discoveries. "Our experiences, our vulnerabilities, all for financial gain." Eliza listened in, a silence, the pain evident in her tired eyes. "I always had my doubts," she finally confessed. "Certain attitudes of Gabriel, certain inconsistencies, but I wanted so badly to believe we had a higher purpose." "And we do," Ryan affirmed, holding her hand across the table, "but not what Gabriel is selling." "What are we going to do? The others need to know." "I'm going to talk to each one individually. Some will believe, others maybe not, but the important thing is that they have the opportunity to know the truth." In the weeks that followed, Ryan dedicated himself to 2 main tasks: alerting the Sajadi group members about Gabriel's manipulations and rebuilding his own life on more solid foundations. Some, like Sophie and Anthony, received his revelations with shock and gratitude. Others, especially those who had been with Gabriel longer, reacted with hostility, accusing Ryan of trying to destroy something beautiful out of envy or misunderstanding. "You simply don't understand Gabriel's greater vision," Joseph, the elderly, man argued, refusing to listen further. "He needs resources to spread our message. What's wrong with charging for that?" Despite the resistance, Ryan felt at peace with his decision. He was doing what he considered right, regardless of the results. Titoi. Home, the transformation was more subtle, but equally significant. Ryan now dedicated quality time to his family, not out of obligation or guilt, but out of a genuine desire to be present. "Dad, can you help me with this math problem?" Lucas asked one afternoon. "Sure," Ryan replied, setting aside the book he was reading. Before, he would have said he was busy, that his son should try on his own first. As he explained equations to Lucas, he realized how smart and observant the boy was, how he formulated interesting questions. How could he have failed to notice this for so long? With Mia, reconnecting required more patience. The teenager maintained a protective distance, as if fearing to invest emotionally in a father who could disappear again at any moment, whether in excessive work or obsessive causes. "I heard you dance incredibly well," Ryan commented one night, trying to start a conversation. "Your ballet teacher called today saying you have potential for competitions." "It's just a hobby," Mia replied, shrugging her shoulders. "Nothing important." "If it's important to you, it's important to me," Ryan insisted. "I'd like to see you dance someday when you feel like showing." Something in Mia's gaze softened, a small breach in the wall she had built. "Maybe," she replied. "I have a performance next month." With Emily, the reconstruction was deeper. Years of emotional distancing couldn't be overcome overnight, but both were committed to the process. "It feels like we're getting to know each other again," she commented one night as they walked hand in hand through the park near the apartment, a newly discovered habit that both appreciated. "In a way we are," Ryan replied. "You're getting to know this new man I'm becoming, and I'm getting to know the incredible woman you've always been, but that I didn't fully see." The financial issue continued to be a challenge. Without the director's salary, they had to make several adjustments to the family budget. The imported car was exchanged for a simpler model, some trips were cancelled, unnecessary subscriptions suspended. However, to Ryan's surprise, these changes didn't bring the feeling of loss he feared. On the contrary, there was a certain freedom in simplifying, in realizing that much of what he considered needs were actually just superfluous desires. As for work, Ryan explored new possibilities. Mr. Oliver had offered his old position at the construction company, but Ryan politely declined. "I appreciate the offer and especially the warning about Gabriel, which was crucial," he wrote in an email to his former boss, "but I need to follow a different path now." Instead, he began consulting for small businesses, focusing on ethical and sustainable practices. The work paid less but gave him the flexibility and alignment of values he was looking for. One afternoon, he received an unexpected phone call. It was Sophie, the medical student from Gabriel's group. "Some of us are meeting," she explained. "Not like before, not with Gabriel's pretensions, just people who shared similar experiences, supporting each other, without leaders or hierarchies." "That sounds wonderful," Ryan replied, genuinely interested. "And we're doing volunteer work at St. Clair's Hospital with terminally ill patients," Sophie continued. "No religious proselytizing, just human support, companionship, listening. I thought maybe you'd like to participate." Ryan felt a warm emotion expand in his chest. It was exactly the kind of meaningful work he was looking for, not grandiose or spectacular like Gabriel's plans, but real, human, concrete. "When do I start?" he asked without hesitation. On his first day at the hospital, Ryan met Mrs. Connie, a 78-year-old woman with advanced stage cancer. He sat beside her bed, uncertain about what to say or do. "You're new here," she observed with a fragile smile. "I can tell by the uncomfortable look." Ryan laughed, relaxing a bit. "Is it that obvious?" "Don't worry. Just being here is already a kindness." For the next hour, Ryan just listened as Mrs. Connie told stories from her long life. Some funny, others sad, all deeply human. "You know what I've learned at this point in life?" she asked as the visiting time was ending. "That in the end, only the love we've given and received matters. The rest is detail." Ryan nodded, feeling the profound truth in those simple words. It was exactly what his near-death experience had shown him, stripped of all interpretations and elaborations. As he left the hospital that day, Ryan felt a peace he hadn't experienced since before the accident. Not the illusory peace of absolute certainties that Gabriel sold, but the genuine peace of one who finally finds their path. At home, he told his family about his experience. "I think I finally understood," he said, as they had dinner. "We don't need grand events or dramatic revelations to make a difference. Sometimes it's enough to hold the hand of someone who's suffering, listen to their stories, share a moment of humanity." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with contained tears. "This is the most authentic transformation I've seen in you since the accident. And the most lasting, I hope, Ryan added. That night, as he lay down, Ryan thought about all the twists and turns his life had taken since the accident, the glimpse of the beyond, the initial transformation, the detour with Gabriel, and, now finally, this more balanced and genuine path. His journey was far from over, but for the first time he felt that the direction was right. Not perfect, not free from challenges, but authentic. And that, he realized, was all that really mattered. Year passed since the accident that transformed Ryan's life. Autumn painted Philadelphia with golden hues, and a gentle breeze blew through the streets as he walked through the same intersection where it all happened. He stopped exactly at the site of the impact, watching cars pass by, hurried people, life following its impassive course. No one there could imagine the extraordinary journey that this ordinary piece of asphalt had triggered. "I thought I'd find you here today," said a voice behind him. Ryan turned and saw Emily approaching with a small bouquet of flowers in her hands. "Predictable, isn't it?" he smiled. "No, just natural," she replied, handing him the flowers. "Some dates call us to reflection." Together they walked to a nearby bench from where they could see the movement of the city. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments. "How do you feel looking back?" Emily finally asked. Ryan took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "Grateful," he replied. "Despite all the ups and downs, despite the detours and stumbles, I'm deeply grateful for this second chance." Ryan's life had found a balance that once seemed impossible. His consultancy for small businesses was modestly thriving, allowing him to maintain control over his time and values. 3 days a week, he dedicated a few hours to volunteer work at the hospital, now not only with terminally ill patients, but also with survivors of traumatic experiences who, like him, sought to give new meaning to their lives. At home, the transformation was evident. The old distant and absent Ryan gave way to a present man, attentive to the small and large needs of his family. Dinners were now moments of genuine connection, without cell phones or distractions, filled with meaningful conversations and spontaneous laughter. Mia had finally opened up to her father, allowing him to enter her world of adolescent dreams and insecurities. A few months ago, after attending one of her ballet performances, Ryan had surprised her with the news that he had secured a partial scholarship for a summer course with a renowned dance company. "How did you do that?" she asked, incredulous. "I talked to your teacher, researched opportunities, made some calls. Nothing extraordinary," he replied. "The talent is all yours." The hug he received from his daughter that day was worth more than any professional recognition he had ever had. Luke, in turn, flourished with paternal attention. Together, they had built a small telescope, fueling the boy's passion for astronomy, an interest Ryan didn't even know his son had until he started really listening to him. As for Emily, the marriage had undergone a true renewal. They rediscovered each other mutually, shared dreams that had been set aside, built an intimacy that went far beyond the physical, a communion of values and purposes. "Look at them," Ryan commented, discreetly gesturing to a couple of executives passing by hurriedly, both talking on their cell phones, ignoring each other. "We were like that." "And we could still be," Emily replied, "if it weren't for—" She left the sentence unfinished, but Ryan knew exactly what she meant. If it weren't for the accident, for the near-death experience, for the second chance. "Do you think we need to almost leave to value what we have?" he asked contemplatively. "Maybe some of us, yes," Emily replied. "But I believe there are always ways to awaken without reaching that extreme." Like what happened with Gabriel's group. The name still provoked conflicting feelings in Ryan. After the break, they discovered that Gabriel had fled with the money already raised for the event, leaving several group members deeply hurt and some financially harmed. The experience had been painful but also enlightening. "Gabriel was a detour, not the destination," Ryan replied. "He exploited something profoundly true, the search for meaning after a transcendent experience, for selfish purposes. But the search itself remains valid." Emily nodded, understanding. "And how is the new group? The one you formed with Sophie and the others?" "Different. Horizontal. Honest," Ryan smiled. "We have no pretensions of changing the world or revealing universal truths. We just share our stories, support each other, and try to use what we've learned to help where we can. That sounds much healthier. It's what I discovered, Em, Ryan continued, his gaze lost on the city horizon. Real transformation doesn't happen in dramatic gestures or spectacular revelations. It happens in small moments of presence, in daily choices, in how we treat each person who crosses our path. As they talked, the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city buildings. Ryan vividly remembered the light he had seen during his experience. Not an external light, but something that seemed to come from within and from everywhere simultaneously. "Do you still think about that moment? About what you saw?" Emily asked, as if reading his thoughts. "Every day," Ryan admitted, not with the same distressing intensity as at the beginning, but as a constant reminder, an internal compass. "And do you still believe it was real? That it wasn't just a hallucination caused by lack of oxygen to the brain, as the doctors suggested?" Ryan smiled. It was a question he had heard many times, from many different people over the past year. "You know what I learned, Em? That's not even the most important question. Real or not in the objective sense, that experience changed everything for me. It revealed truths that were with me all along, but that I couldn't or wouldn't see." They remained silent for a few moments, contemplating the sunset that now painted the sky with shades of pink and purple. "Shall we go home?" Emily suggested, standing up and extending her hand. "The kids are preparing something special for dinner, a surprise to mark the date." Ryan accepted her hand, feeling a wave of gratitude for this simple gesture, for this extraordinary woman who had remained by his side throughout the turbulent journey of self-discovery. On the way home, they passed by the small neighborhood church. Ryan still attended it, but his relationship with faith had changed profoundly. It was no longer based on appearances or empty rituals, but on a genuine search for connection with something greater than himself. "I heard you and Pastor Samuel finally made peace," Emily commented. "Yes," Ryan confirmed. "It was a difficult conversation, but necessary. He still doesn't agree with all my interpretations, and that's okay. I learned that we can disagree without ceasing to respect and love each other." When they arrived home, they were greeted by the delicious aroma of home-cooked food and the animated voices of Mia and Luke in the kitchen. The table was neatly set, with the best set of dishes and candles lit in the center. "Surprise! The biscuit," children exclaimed when the parents entered. "We made your favorite dish, Dad." "With Mrs. Clark's help," Mia confessed, pointing to the elderly neighbor who smiled discreetly in the corner of the kitchen. "She's an excellent teacher," Luke added, "and she tells incredible stories about what Philadelphia was like in the old days." Ryan hugged his children, then turned to the neighbor whom a year ago he barely greeted in the elevator. "Mrs. Clark, you are a blessing to this family," he said, hugging her affectionately. "Thank you for everything." "I'm the one who should." "Thank you, Ryan," the lady replied, moved. "You've brought life back to my days. An old lonely lady like me needs to feel useful, needed." During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally between light subjects and deeper reflections. There was a palpable feeling of unity, of belonging, that Ryan had never experienced so intensely before. After dessert, while Emily and Mrs. Clark chatted in the living room, Ryan helped the children with the dishes, another unthinkable change in his previous life. "Dad," Mia suddenly said, "remember that conversation we had a few months ago about what happened to you during the accident?" "I remember, sweetheart. I've been thinking a lot about it, about how life can change in an instant, about how we waste time on things that don't matter." Ryan observed her, surprised by the maturity in her words. "And I came to a conclusion," she continued. "I don't want to wait for an accident or a dramatic experience to live more consciously. I want to learn from your story, Dad." Ryan's eyes watered. "That's the most beautiful thing you could say to me, sweetheart." "Luke and I also have a surprise," Mia added, signaling to her brother, who ran to his room and came back with a wrapped package. Ryan opened the present, revealing a handmade book. On the cover, handwritten, "Ryan's Second Chance, Lessons from a Journey of Transformation." "It's a book we started writing together," Luke explained. about everything we've learned watching you this past year. It's not finished yet, Mia added, because your story is still being written, Dad. Our story. Flipping through the pages full of texts, drawings, and family photographs, Ryan felt an emotion that transcended words. It was as if, finally, all the fragments of his journey came together in a coherent and meaningful whole. Later that night, after the children and Mrs. Clark had retired, Ryan and Emily sat on the porch, contemplating the starry sky of Philadelphia. "A year ago, when I received that call from the hospital," Emily commented, "I thought I had lost you forever. Then, when you came back so changed, so obsessed, I feared I had lost the man I knew in another way." "And now?" Ryan asked softly. "Now I know I didn't lose you. On the contrary, I found parts of you that were always there, hidden under layers of distractions and misplaced priorities." Ryan held his wife's hand, feeling the warmth of her skin, the solidity of her presence. "You know what else I learned? On this journey, Em, that the light I saw in that moment between life and death, it's not just there in the beyond, it's here too, in every gesture of love, in every moment of true presence, in every conscious choice we make. And that light never goes out," Emily completed, "even in the darkest hours." "Even in the darkest hours," Ryan repeated, looking at the stars that dotted the night sky. The next morning, upon waking, Ryan contemplated Emily's sleeping face. Beside him heard the soft sounds of the house. Luke already up, probably setting up some new scientific experiment in the kitchen, Mia still sleeping, as typical of teenagers on weekends. A sense of fullness invaded him. Not the frantic euphoria of the first days after his experience, nor the false certainty of the period with Gabriel, but something deeper and more sustainable. The peace of one who has finally found their place in the world, of one who has finally understood what really matters. He got up silently so as not to wake Emily and walked to the window. The sun was rising over Philadelphia, a new day was beginning, and with it, another opportunity to live consciously, to love genuinely, to be truly present. "Thank you," he whispered to the brightening sky, knowing that his words went beyond any formal religion or limited concept of divinity. It was a thank you to life itself, to the opportunity to experience it in its fullness, with all its joys and pains, challenges and blessings. A second chance, after all, is not just about surviving. It's about learning to truly live.